gosh, there's something really wrong with my eyes. So I ended up going to the eye doctor, of course, and there was papilledema, which is swelling of the optic nerve in both of my eyes. And long story short, it turned out that I had this strange thing called idiopathic intracranial hypertension, which is basically your body is producing too much spinal fluid, and it presses against the backs of the eyes and the optic nerve, the optic disc. So, you know, the course of that treatment was a couple of years. I had to take Diamox, and it was rough because the Diamox had lots of side effects and stuff. But thankfully, eventually, my neurologist took me off the Diamox unless, you know, I started having headaches, and then I could, you know, take it as needed. But, you know, that was like the first struggle that I had with my vision. And so that was, I think, 2010. And then, let's see, 2014, zooming ahead. I got married June 14th to my wonderful husband. On the night of our wedding, my grandmother, who had end-stage cancer, passed away. And so, you know, I had been dealing with her sickness and just that devastation of watching her waste away. I've been dealing with that for, you know, a month or two. And it was hard. It was so hard. And, you know, my health was really suffering. I'm one of those people that when I get emotionally stressed, then my health is very reactive. And, you know, so I had been having problems for a little while, feeling just rough. And just, you know, feeling sick a lot and throwing up a lot. You know, I figured it was probably related to a nervous breakdown because, I mean, I was losing basically my mother, even though she wasn't my mother. She really was in a lot of ways my mother. And I love my mom to pieces, but my grandma, she was just as much my mom as my mom is. And anyway, so that was June of 2014. By the time we got to October of 2014, my symptoms were so bad that I couldn't even hardly work. I was in a lot of pain. I was very sick. I was very fatigued, and just a lot of things going on with me that were pretty miserable. And so I went to the doctor, and I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And so my doctor put me on medication to rapidly reduce the levels of my blood sugar. And one of the things that they don't tell you when you are diagnosed with diabetes is some of the things that can happen to your body when you start to bring those glucose level numbers down. And so what happened to me was about 4 or 5 days after I started the metformin and the Nicena, both oral medications, to reduce the numbers of my, you know, the level of sugar in my blood, I noticed that I was having a lot of problems being able to see. Everything was getting a little bit blurry, and, you know, I was really struggling to be able to read things. And over the course of 72 hours after that onset, I couldn't see anything clearly. Now, keep in mind, I was still working in Charlottesville, still teaching my kids. It was very difficult. My husband went out and got me like 6 pairs of reading glasses to try to help me be able to like still work and not have to miss any time. Driving was a challenge. I couldn't recognize somebody coming down the hall at me without the reading glasses on. That's how distorted and blurry everything was to me. And one of the things that really hit me hard when I was going through this, because although I hoped it was temporary, because I had been, I called my doctor, and, he said you're just going to have to wait until this levels out and just see where your vision is at that time. Like, there's nothing you can do about it right now. And so I was hoping that, it would go back to normal and I'd be able to see again. There was that fear, of course, that I wouldn't. And I started to really be scared. And I started to think, oh my goodness, I won't be able to make dolls anymore. Like, I won't be able to do that because I won't be able to see clearly. And it was really terrifying to think that, because, I had gotten away from painting during the time my grandmother was sick. I just didn't feel inspired to paint. I was crushed. So I wasn't doing anything artistic at that time. I could barely function, could barely keep breathing. And, so I waited, and this went on for almost an entire month. Everything was very blurry. It was very difficult to function, to read, but I was doing the reading glasses, and otherwise I was feeling much better, because my blood sugar was normalizing, so I didn't have the nausea and the fatigue and all that sort of stuff. So I did feel better, but I just couldn't see. And I just remember thinking, oh God, if you just, if you could heal this, like, I really want to be able to work on babies again. And that's kind of where I think my motivation to get back into making dolls came from, really, was, the fact that I was going through this time when it was not known whether or not I was going to be able to recover my sharp vision. Thank God, after almost a month of not being able to see hardly at all, my vision started to return to normal. And as soon as my vision started to return to normal, I began to paint again. And I found a renewed passion for it, because I felt that I had come so close to losing that, and it's kind of like, you take things for granted, and then when you see that it could possibly be taken from you, then you really start to be thankful for having it to begin with, and it means so much more. And so that was what kind of got me back into painting. Thank God I don't wear glasses, although I'm thinking when I go back to the eye doctor I may have to start wearing reading glasses, but he said so far so good. So I hope I didn't bore you with that. But so many of you have said that, you like hearing about my life and kind of being able to see me as a person, like, and learn more about me. I'm really quite a boring individual. But I appreciate you guys being interested. Most of you guys know I have an uncle who has end-stage cancer. It's my mom's brother, and he's not doing well. He's really suffering a lot. So prayers are appreciated for him. He's now on liquid morphine and tablet morphine, as well as oxycodone, several pills at a time every few hours. And he still is in a lot of pain. So if you guys wouldn't mind if you could just lift him up in your prayers. know God has a reason for everything, even though sometimes it's hard for us to see it, because we don't have that vantage point. I like to think of it as, when you're on the ground, it's hard to see all the landmarks because your vantage point is so limited. But when you cross over into the spiritual, you're on a different level, and so you can see the reasons. So when things like this happen and I don't understand, I guess the way I accept it is by thinking about that. It just doesn't make sense because of my vantage point. When I talked to my mom yesterday evening, I told her, I said, we have to keep in mind that we weren't meant to be here forever. Life is a temporary journey. And, we love as much as we can, and we pray for people and lift them up, and we just accept that there are some things that we don't understand and we're not going to understand. Maybe never at all, and definitely not until we're not here at this level. It's so hard to watch somebody that you love suffer. But I believe that he'll be going to a better place. I believe that God prepares a way. I absolutely believe that. And I guess, there's like part of you that feels guilty for having joy when somebody is in so much pain, You almost feel selfish to enjoy something. But you know what? I think that's a normal reaction, and I have that as well. But I think, glorifying God during times when it's the hardest, and finding joy in those times when it's the hardest, is probably the most important time we can do that. Because it's easy to be joyful when everything's going well, everybody in your life is healthy and happy. It's easy to have that joy. It's a little harder to find when you have suffering and oppression that you don't fully understand. And when my grandmother was so sick, I thought about, postponing my wedding. But my dear sister, she talked some sense into me, and she said, do you know how much that would crush her if you did that? And she was right. My grandma would have been crushed. And I really feel like she held on until I was off on my honeymoon. It was just literally a couple of hours after we got to our destination, I got the call. And then, of course, you feel a little guilty for a while because I'm all the way here. But there was also a peace in that, that she wanted me to be happy. My sister and I, we were grandchildren, but we really weren't grandchildren because we both grew up with her, living with her, and she was mom. So not to bring you guys down, Sorry if I did. The important thing to take away from that is that life goes on and there is still joy. And, you know, just don't get hung up in the ditches of life. Don't get stranded in the ditches. They're supposed to be a temporary thing. They're supposed to be, what do they call it? Character building. So let it build your character and then find your joy. And I'm not saying that that's easy, because there was a time after my grandmother passed away that I was not really very functional at all. I was crushed. My spirit was crushed. I mean, I had never had emotional pain like that. I hurt emotionally in places in my body and my being that I did not even know existed. And it took a while. You know, and then there was the time after her death when fear of everything set in. And I guess probably it's because, for me, I already have an anxiety disorder, well, several anxiety disorders, and I have PTSD, and, you know, so maybe I'm a little more susceptible to fear-based things, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I just became to the point where I was pretty close to paralyzed. And it took a while. And I've always believed that, you know, Grandma's prayers when she was alive kept us going. So I always ask God, if it's pleasing to you, would you let my grandma pray for me still? Pray for us still. And, you know, it might seem silly, strange, but I really believe sometimes He does let that happen. Because sometimes there's this peace that comes without warning, and it just envelops me. I'm very thankful and excited to be working from home these days. It's much less stressful for me. And I feel like, you know, recording these videos, albeit they may be very boring sometimes, it's almost a form of therapy for me, just to be able to kind of share my story. I'm going to go ahead and paint the eyebrows on this one. And maybe let's start the hair. So to make my brown, I start with the brown base. If I just put that on the doll, it's going to look yellowy orangey. So rather than just use that by itself, I'm going to choose a black. Mars black is like brown black. Carbon black is like black black. So I'm going to add a little bit of carbon black in there. Oops. And sometimes I'll use the Mars black if I'm going for a lighter shade. And then I'm just going to pull out Just a little speck of the blue. And that's going to take off the orange, the blue will. I'm going to keep this paint relatively thick. This I'm just basically laying down the foundation for the individual brows. And they don't have to be perfect. And for the individual hairs, I'm going to have to make the paint a bit thicker. So I'm going to go again with my brown to add some thickness. Doesn't look like I'm going to have to add any more blue to it. It doesn't look like it's going to need toning down with as far as the orange cast. So So when I do this really speckly, the speckly reds like this, I usually like to let them dry all the way and then brush them down like I did these. It gives a smoother finish and more of a softer look instead of being really speckled. It helps to blend in some of those colors. And keep in mind, these have not yet gotten any blue. So all this red is really in preparation for the blue wash and the veining. And then we'll finish up with the topmost layers. A little bit of the purples, which I'm keeping quite a bit of purple in the undertone for these anyway, because I feel like that looks really good. And these I'm going to bake for 2 8-minute sessions with about probably 2 minutes in between. If I can push my buttons correctly. And look, we've got a little cherry angioma right there. These guys flash off a little bit more so I can get the blue wash on. And of course I'll have additional time to work on the limbs while the heads are being rooted, so I don't have to work as quickly with the limbs. And then what will happen when she sends back the heads is that I'm going to compare the heads to the limbs, and then I will add more detailing where it's necessary. Usually I'm pretty close if I'm trying hard to be pretty close. Or if there are any changes, it's just really subtle. Alright, so for now I think that's going to be it. You can see I have a bit further to go with these. I still have to add the blue wash and the veins. And again, those will be done with the limbs once the heads are shipped off to Miss Sharon to root. Alright, thank you so much for joining me again. I appreciate you guys so much. If you have any questions or suggestions or just to say hi, I really welcome that. Thank you so much and have a fantastic rest of your day. Come on, Cook.